Well, North Korea has allegedly stolen about $2 billion to fund its weapons program. A leaked United Nations report says the country used cyber attacks to target banks and cryptocurrency exchanges. This comes after the country launched 2 short-range missiles Tuesday, which leader Kim Jong Un confirmed were warnings against joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea. Meanwhile, President Trump has said South Korea has agreed to pay more money to the U.S. for defense against North Korea. In a tweet earlier, he said South Korea is a very wealthy nation that now feels an obligation to contribute to the military defense provided by the United States of America. The relationship between the two countries is a very good one. He's the author of Nuclear Showdown. North Korea takes on the world. So the president, Gordon, says these are short-range missiles. It's okay.
It's not okay. UN Security Council Resolution 1718 says that North Korea firing any ballistic missiles, including short-range ones, violation. And, you know, if we don't stop the North Koreans at the beginning of an escalatory cycle, they're going to escalate. We know this from past history. So it's clearly that we should stop them now before this gets out of hand.
We know the North Koreans have a good relationship with China, right? We know that we are currently in a great deal of pressure with China, putting pressure on them with Chinese trade. Is there any direct correlation that they feel more emboldened now as this is going on in China?
I tend to think that the Chinese have put the North Koreans up to this. You know, we've seen in the past coordination between Beijing and Pyongyang. And the whole story is essentially the North Koreans do something provocative. We send our Secretary of State to Beijing. We plead for cooperation. The Chinese get concessions on something else. In this case now, of course, it would be trade. You know, previous secretaries of states and presidents have fallen for this. You know, it's on us not to do that again.
You know, when the president took over, I was actually surprised at how many experts like yourself who have been doing this for decades were like, other people were questioning his approach to you know, something very different, not just letting the diplomats do it, but being direct, face to face. What's the repercussions if he goes too far and allows this to continue on and keeps giving North Korea a pass?
Well, I think what's going to happen is the North Koreans are going to try to break the alliance between South Korea and the U.S. South Korea has a president, Moon Jae-in, who's very, very anti-American. And to show you the depths of the anti-Americanism there, when Trump was in Seoul about a month ago, the first lady was standing next to him. She was wearing a blue butterfly pin. Now, Trump obviously didn't know this, but in South Korea, that's a symbol of anti-Americanism. So essentially, you had the president and the first lady of South Korea disrespect not only Trump himself, but the United States of America.
So how do you say when people look at that tweet that the president tweeted out saying, look, they're paying for military help here, how do you read that?
First of all, Moon Jae-in does not want American troops in his country. So I'm thinking he's probably going to try to break the alliance by working on this compensation issue to sort of create this friction. The other thing, though, is, you know, U.S. troops are in South Korea not just to protect South Korea, but to protect the United States as well. That's our Western defense perimeter. For more than a century, that's where we have drawn our line of defense. So those troops are there for our benefit as well as for South Korea's. And remember, by the way, we have a lot of Americans and American businesses in South Korea and Japan, and that's important for us. So, you know, I understand what President Trump wants more money for it. Great thing if we do get more cash, but we've got to remember there are limits to how far we can push South Korea.
When you talk about China, and we're noticing a great deal of currency manipulation recently, when you talk about U.S. impact, how this affects regular Americans on the ground, when China does that, what kind of impact does it have to regular Americans?
Well, you know, tariff issues, people say, well, look, the U.S. pays tariffs. And in a technical sense, that's right. But up to now, the Chinese have been bearing most of the cost of these tariffs. And with the devaluation of the renminbi, the Chinese currency, it means that China is going to pay this next round of tariffs, largely because prices are going down. And ultimately, these tariffs are driving businesses out of China, factories moving elsewhere. And that means these tariffs are not going to apply in 6 months, 9 months down the road. So we're reducing our vulnerability to Chinese retaliation.
A lot of the news is focused on these 2 shootings in Dayton and El Paso, but we are also keeping an eye on the rest of the world. Among the places we're watching, Hong Kong, these protests that keep continuing. China, Beijing has said, we're going to step in if this gets worse and continues. Do you see that happening? Where do you see Hong Kong headed?
That could happen in the future, but right now I think China really understands it has no good options. So it continues to issue these dire warnings, 2 this week, 1 last week, probably 3 or 4 next week. But the Chinese know that if they introduce the People's Liberation Army or the People's Armed Police, it's going to be open warfare, and not all the blood spilled is going to be Hong Kong people's. So I think the Chinese know that they shouldn't do this, but they have really no choice eventually, because the kids on the street, they want not only the withdrawal of this extradition bill, which started the protests, but they also want freedom, they want independence from China, and they're now talking about the end of communism in China itself. So the demands have escalated over time.
When you look at North Korea, you look at Hong Kong, you look at Beijing, what worries you the most of all these issues that we're facing when it comes from an American perspective?
I worry, I guess, most about Hong Kong because my wife came from Hong Kong.
Personal,
and
yeah.
We know people there, got family there, and there could very well be blood spilled. But, you know, in terms of ultimate significance, it's the trade dispute, because this has been a trade war going on for decades. Only now are we starting to do something about it. Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has a very low risk threshold right now because he realizes if he makes a mistake, he could lose everything. So right now we're at a point where anything can happen, and we do not appreciate what the risk is for us.
Gordon Chang, I want to thank you. It's always grateful to have you here on set.
Oh, well, thank you, Rena.